Good afternoon, guys. So we left off right here with the opening of the poem, and we have Prufrock announcing to himself that he's thinking of doing something, taking an action, leaving his easy chair and going out into the world. Now, it is accepted, it's a good way of putting it, it's accepted that he is talking about London. Although he doesn't name the city specifically, it's agreed upon that is the location of the poem. Now, the manner in which he describes the city life, you'll see repeated throughout the rest of the work. The references to half-deserted streets and streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. These type of dark and moody and, if you want to say, gothic imagery are used in, are excellent metaphors for any major metropolis nationwide or in Europe. So you've got numerous associations that can be made. This could be anywhere. Prufrock could be every man. Okay. Now moving forward, you got this really short stanza. It's just a couplet. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. This will repeat on the next page here. So when we reach this page 5, at this point, I'll explain in more detail what that couplet is referring to. But as a reader, you are not supposed to fully understand yet. You have a lot of questions. Who are the women? What room are we talking about? Why is Michelangelo suddenly brought up? This stanza, like I said before, stands alone. It does not directly connect to the previous stanza. Furthermore, this stanza does not connect directly to the next stanza, stanza 3. So, stanza 3 states, the yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue to the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. Now, this stanza opens up directly with a yellow fog, and it continues throughout the stanza being described as a cat-like creature. It starts out as a yellow fog, then it becomes a yellow smoke. When one pictures fog, it usually is pale white, sometimes a bluish gray, but in this case, it's yellow. So Prufrock is letting you know that this fog is polluted, it's filthy, it's dirty. So you have yet another confirmation that this poem is about the filth in society, the filth that builds up in the inner cities, and it attributes to the attitudes and personality traits of the average person, in this case, Prufrock. This fog, or smog, would be a more appropriate word, smoke and fog combined, smog, is described as a feral cat, an alley cat, a animal that's running around without an owner. Likewise, the cat is running around in the evening in the alleyways along these polluted streets. Using the typical gender association one applies to cats, you've got female. If it is another way of saying a female character, then he's referring to prostitutes, women who wander around seeking men for cash, for trying to establish a sense of security. But in the end, they themselves are filthy in more ways than one. There's multiple meanings to take out of this metaphor, this analogy of the imagery. To take this up another notch, notice it's a soft October night. Like I mentioned before, this is a mock love song. So a traditional love song would be in the May time, April maybe, in the spring basically, in the early morning where the birds are singing and the sun's just about to come up and the two lovers are standing side by side, looking at each other, looking at the sun, holding hands. So it's very romantic and very soothing and comfortable. Whereas here, you've got a man wandering around looking at prostitutes and seeing pollution everywhere. This is the opposite of a love song. Okay, moving down to the next stanza. He's going to shift off discussion of the pollution and move slightly forward in talking about time. As much as Prufrock obsesses about pollution, he will be obsessing with time. And that will be revealed in a few minutes why that's the case. And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, in time for time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of toast and tea. Looking at the opening line again, his obsession with time is extending throughout the stanza and ends with this mention of tea, the tea time ceremony. In England, everybody partakes in the ceremony. It is supposed to be as a democratic moment where all of society is relaxing for a moment and getting some sugar, getting some caffeine so that they can enjoy their afternoon. There are clues dropped within the poem, in this particular position of the poem, where you gain more insight into Prufrock's personality. He talks about being indecisive. He talks about revising any ideas or visions that he has for his moment, this time he's struggling to decide what to do. He can't make up his mind. He waffles back and forth. Likewise, also, he mentions the question. Now, this is a subconscious reference. He won't go very far into details about what the question actually is, but he is mentioning in a subconscious manner that overwhelming question that's in the first stanza. It's like his mind is presenting it to him, and again, just like in the first stanza, he's going to avoid it, move away, change the topic. In line 28, notice he says there will be time to murder and create. I don't want you to take the impression that he is like a Jack the Ripper, another character from England in the 1800s, in his case, who's obsessed with prostitutes. What you have here, this murder and creation, are an element of process. It's murder and creation as objects of possibility with time. If you have time, you can create and follow through with projects. or you've heard the expression kill time. If you're killing time, you're just in limbo, you're paralyzed, you can't move. This ties in again down here with the indecisions and the revisions. Everything is built on a connection here throughout the poem. So in line 27, to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet, he's basically saying he has so much social anxiety, he can't just casually bump into anyone. He has to be prepared. He has to have minutes to restructure himself so that he appears that he's in control, that he appears in the proper social venue, and that he can acknowledge another presence, and he knows how to talk to the person. He's got a script prepared. Otherwise, he's going to fumble around, he's going to stumble about, he's going to be embarrassed. He's easily intimidated by another person. Now, lines 35 and 36 are another stanza that stands alone by itself. It repeats, like a refrain, it repeats the previous stanza from above. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Taking this into consideration, there are only two types of women Prufrock can discuss. He can talk about women of lower class, the prostitutes, or he can talk about women of class, of upper class, the leisure class, women of leisure. So in this particular stanza, he is talking about women of leisure, women who go to tea time. You have a slight clue here from the previous stanza where the mentioning of the tea time ritual. Then you shift here. These women are a clutch of women gathered together, and they're walking. I like to picture them walking through a museum, which will tie into the name Michelangelo. These women are going through the museum. Prufrock's on the side. Okay, he's not a part of the crowd. He's isolated and alone. He sees them coming and going through the museum as he's wandering himself. Now, the reason you can tag this into the impression of upper class, these women are talking about Michelangelo. The average low-class prostitute would not know of fine art. A woman with education who comes from money would have studied fine arts and probably would have been into Rome to see the authentic pieces. Michelangelo, likewise, if you consider what his work consists of, it's mainly biblical, but he had a tendency to make very statuesque, very large, very muscular imagery, both men and women. And for the most part, they're nudes. So you have women of class talking about the artwork of Michelangelo, which are larger than average human beings. They're heroic stature, okay? And they're educated. These are the type of women that Prufrock is intimidated by, partly because of the subject they're discussing, and then if he came up casually trying to talk to them, introduce himself, and flirt, more or less, exchange phone numbers, so to speak, and he hears them talking to Michelangelo, he knows he doesn't stand a chance because he has a high sense of self-criticism. And in a few stanzas, you'll see just how he envisions himself. He does not see himself up to par to one of these works by Michelangelo. If you keep the statue of David primarily in your mind, you have a huge statue of a naked man. Okay, nothing covers up the nudity of the figure. And it's a heroic Old Testament hero. a figure of Old Testament grandeur, glory. He's the perfect mortal. Okay, he's not a god or divine figure. He's a man sanctioned by God who will become king. Okay. And Prufrock can't live up to those standards. Okay, now we're going to shift to the next stanza. And in this case, we will get a physical description of him. And notice he starts out with time again as an element. Here he says, and indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pen. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. Notice here he asks some rather essential, important questions. These are not the overwhelming question, however. So, do I dare and do I dare disturb the universe, although they sound like a very important, radical, groundbreaking type of inquiry, these are not moving towards the large question. Okay, he can't ask that question, the larger question. So these are being asked, noticed. Therefore, they're not the overwhelming question that can't be asked. He sees himself with a bald spot, with losing his hairline. He also sees himself with thin arms and legs. He's insect-like. And again, if he comes up to the women, any woman, they're going to look at him critically and say he's balding and he's skinny. Why would I associate myself with him? He's not of my caliber. Okay, so again, this is all self-criticism. He's channeling his criticism to the women, any of the upper-class women that he chances upon. And again, at the end of the stanza, notice he repeats the imagery of previously of decisions and revisions. He's indecisive. He might dare to consider going up to these women, but this disturbance in his universe would be too great. He'd break down. He can't handle it. Okay, next stanza. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall, beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? This presumption that he mentions here will be repeated a few more times in the next unfolding stanzas. So we'll address that on the last one. The stanza opens up with the pronoun them. And in this case, judging from what he's been talking about here with women, one would assume the mentioning of them will be repeating and picking up and carrying on with the subject being women. But it's a false lead. This and them, in this case, refers to time. So he's back to obsessing with time specifically and the elements of times. The reason it is out of order, notice it goes evenings, mornings, afternoons. Afternoons is a rhyme, direct rhyme with spoons. So it's more of a rhyme controlling equation. But again, if you think of Prufrock, he's slightly eccentric, he's different in his thought process, so the not going in a typical chronological fashion of waking up in the morning, surviving the day, resting in the afternoon. He starts out his train of thought with evenings, when he's wandering the streets, or where he would consider himself wandering the streets, looking for the prostitutes. Line 52 in this case is an example of intertextuality. This comes from the comedy by William Shakespeare, Twelfth Night. Prufrock is thinking of the line. He is quoting it directly in his head, but he's using it in a different fashion. It does not follow the logic that Shakespeare uses it in the play. In this case, the way Prufrock is using it, dying with a dying fall, if, for instance, he is in the hotel, the one-night cheap hotel, he's with a prostitute, and he's not enjoying himself, yet he can hear, because these are cheap construction, mind you, he can hear through the walls. And if another prostitute with one of her clients is in the room next to them or further down the hall, and Prufrock can hear them, and he can hear them enjoying themselves, it's only going to make him feel more intimidated and out of place and not able to function. Okay, so he's hearing the voices enjoying themselves, and so dying with a dying fall is that sound, that same orgasmic sound of someone starting out with a loud moan that fades away into nothing, like he's falling off a cliff. So that's where the fall comes in. And this is like a music, and the music's in the distance down the hallway. He wants that orgasmic feeling, okay, but this ties into the presumption, which we'll follow through in a few minutes. The next stanza is going to echo the previous with the having knowledge of them. Okay, in this case, it's shifting off of time, and I have known the eyes already, known them all. The eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pen, when I am penned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? Okay. In this case, again, he's shifting from time to eyes. These are women's eyes. And when women are looking at him, again, he's intimidated. He feels like he's pinned to the wall, like a live bug. You know how they squirm about when they're pinned to a wall. Or you can think of a natural history museum display case with the beetles all in a row pinned into the board. He can't handle when a woman looks directly at him. He thinks they're criticizing him, analyzing him too much. Notice also he's explaining his waste of time like the remains of a cigarette or a cigar. You've got the butt ends of days and ways. And again, he repeats the phrase about presumption. The butt ends of my days and ways are the end result of a cigarette or cigar, which in themselves are like a phallic symbol. So throughout the piece, you're going to bump into phallic and ionic symbols repeatedly. So we moved from time to eyes, and now we have a new element, arms. I have known the arms already, known them all, arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in a lamplight bound with a light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along the table or wrap about a shawl. And should I then presume? And how should I begin? The arms, some critics have noted, are like a phallic symbol, and it's projecting about what's going to happen in the next few stanzas, so be prepared. Eliot, the poet, has inserted at this moment, lines 65 and 66, Prufrock has a strong moment of awareness, self-aware of where he is and of his methods. It's a brief moment. Oftentimes he'll have these really sparks of sudden insight, and then they fade away really quickly. In this particular case, he's asking himself, why is my mind wandering so much along these perverted avenues of filth? Is there a scent of perfume in the air that's distracting me and causing me to think of sexual issues? Well, I'm distracting off any profitable project that he could be developing. And as I mentioned down here, this presumption and this question about how should I begin, when we get to lines 75 to 85, we'll resolve those issues. Do notice he can't visualize the whole woman. The eyes will stare at him, and he can look at the eyes briefly for a second, but he diverts to their arms. He can't look at a woman directly in the eyes. And he probably, once he gets to the arms, he goes down to the ground, out of sight in a nervous fashion. Okay, and notice the ellipses right here. That's a division in the poem. So we've successfully reached the end of the first part of the poem. The next video will pick up with the second part down here. It's like an interlude in classical music. This will shift topics. It will go on to another concept, and it's very short, and then we'll shift into the final third of the poem. Okay, so I apologize for this being so late, but there'll be more coming up. Don't worry. We're going to wrap this up soon. And again, stay safe out there. And if you have any questions, just send me a line. Talk to you later.